All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking about real music in real time for a few real people out there just like you and just like me. So, a very interesting interview that Jonathan Cain did with NPR or WOUB Public Radio. Yeah, I don't listen to NPR or public radio, but it's still a really good interview. Maybe they're trying to change their image. Typically, they wouldn't be celebrating Journey, right? They wouldn't. They talk about some aging folk singer from like 1963 or something. But anyway, it's some bombshell stuff in here. It's you could do several videos on this, and if you're a Steve Perry fan, you might do 16 videos and say Steve Perry spoke about this today, even though it's Jonathan Cain talking about Steve Perry. I can't control YouTube or the internet or what people do. Anyway, here's Voyage and the album Inception, right? So this is a little bait and switch. If you've come over here and you're thinking, you're going to talk about Steve Perry, want to hear about Steve Perry. If you don't have Inception by Voyage, or you haven't heard it and you like Steve Perry and you like Journey, this is your ticket right here. This is your ticket to brand new music that sounds like the music you grew up listening to. 100% guaranteed. And if you stream it, you'll get your money back, right? If I'm wrong. If you buy a copy of it, you're on your own. But I would purchase a copy to help the band. No, I don't get money for promoting this. If I put a link in the video, I might get like $1.40 if someone buys one. That's about it. I don't think I've seen any revenue from these, but I put links in the actual video. So if you click on where it says product, it'll allow you to purchase a copy, probably from like Walmart or Barnes and Noble or something like that. So check it out. All right. All right. So this interview, really good. Gonna do a little screen share here because might as well just read along with everybody. So here's the question here. As that movie of you and Journey has gone on and on, a little play on the lyrics of Don't Stop Believing, and evolved over the years, is there anything that kind of shocked you about the direction that Journey has gone? And Cain hits this one out of the park. I think where the band's at now is where it belongs. We did experiment and evolve. I mean, I think the biggest shock for me was Steve Perry retiring. I mean, not everybody is over Steve Perry retiring, including Jonathan Cain. I had to scratch my head when that happened, when he just said, I've had enough. I'm burned out. I don't want to go on. I would have never bet in a million years that I would have heard that from him. That was the biggest shocker. He was willing to just let it all go. After a couple of platinum records and a successful tour, he's talking about Raised on Radio and Frontiers, most likely, and obviously Escape. Pretty much all the Journey albums were at least platinum, right? Except going way back. And even some of those, I think, have made it to gold status. The pre-Perry albums. He was willing to just let it all go. He had the most fun, I think, he's ever had on the Raised on Radio tour in '87. That was the last tour. He really had fun. Think of that, 1987. Wow, it's like, what, 37 years ago. He really had fun. I mean, it's the first time he didn't have, now this is a first of a few bombshells in this. He didn't have Sherry, and I think it should be Sherry Swafford instead of Sawford, but I could be wrong. He didn't have Sherry, that's Steve Perry's ex-girlfriend, telling him he was lousy and all the stuff she did. So, sounds like Steve had a Yoko. That's what this sounds like. Although Yoko never said that John was bad at anything. So, why did he write a song about this woman if she wasn't very encouraging to him? He goes on. This could be the title of this video. Jonathan Cain says that Steve Perry's ex-girlfriend is a piece of work. She was a piece of work, but he was free. I remember he sang Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock. Probably in celebration that he was free. I wish I had a movie of that, he says. And he did Stand By Me. He was having fun. So Neil and I were thinking, well, even though we lost Smith and Ross, who got rid of Ross Valerie and Steve Smith, who said, get out of the band? That was Steve Perry. Anyway, let's make another record and let's get down the road. But there was this physical thing that came upon him. Now, this is kind of interesting bombshell news as well, because now the physical thing, which we thought started in what, 96 during the whole trial by fire era, apparently had started prior to that. So nothing ever happened. And a lot of people just thought, okay, he walked away, but now he's free. He goes on to say he had some health issues and they got serious and were holding him back. Now, that's kind of vague, right? And you know how I don't like vague talk about health issues, especially these days. Just tell us what it is. Then he went and did a solo thing. Okay, so this is prior to the For the Love of Strange Medicine solo tour. He did a solo thing and in 95 came back. That was another surprise for me. My theory on that is the solo thing was okay, but it wasn't next level stuff for Steve Perry. He wasn't evolving. And I'm sure he missed John and Neil because those guys are very creative and they fill in the blanks where Steve might need, a little help to complete something, whether it's a song or whether it's a performance, to get a performance just right. You have John and Neil there, great musicians to help out. John says, I was like, now he wants to go out and do some dates after 8 years. Neil and I had done Bad English, so he was kind of the surprise in Journey that he was just going to walk away from something he helped build. Yeah. And I think the guys went out and did Bad English because they didn't want this to end. And Bad English was a pretty cool thing for a few years, but the industry and their second album and all the fighting that went on, I guess, during the making of the second album for Bad English was not a cool thing. They had some issues with the record producer. And so I think all of that. And John Waite is a very fickle character as well, from what I've heard. Something that he had so much influence on, something where he was an architect and would just go, well, I'm out. It just seemed like he was fragile and the fame seemed to consume him. Now, this is some honest talk here. This isn't stuff that you would hear from Jonathan Cain immediately following Journey's induction to the Hall of Fame. I don't think all of these details are in his book. So again, this is a pretty cool interview. He didn't like being hounded by fans. Yeah, I've heard that. But more recently, I think he's a little more gracious with the fans that he does encounter. But the reason for that is he's not out in the public all the time anymore. So I think he can take it in small doses. I think he really enjoyed the last tour, and that's why I say that was a shock after such a great run. So they weren't expecting this at all. Then Neil and I looking at each other, going, now what? So we did other things, and then, of course, Trial by Fire comes out, and he's not the same Steve Perry. Again, this is interesting stuff, too. Not the same Steve Perry that we knew. We could tell he was a few steps slower there and was struggling vocally with some things. Now, that's kind of interesting to find out about. And a lot of people, including yours truly, has had a theory about Steve Perry and his vocals, that Perry, after setting an incredibly high bar, right? I mean, who could sing better than Perry? Who could hit high notes like Perry? Who could sing with such soulful, but yet hard rocking at times, and then sing the way nobody sounds like Steve Perry, bottom line, right? So Perry comes back and he's not himself, and he knows he's not the same guy. I think about this when you look at people who have aged quite a bit. I'm looking in the mirror myself these days and going, wow, I'm just not the same guy I was a long time ago. And it's a real bummer. And it's something I think we all struggle with as we get older. Younger people, when you're in your 20s and 30s, whatever, you're not thinking about this. You're really not thinking about mortality. You're not thinking, wow, I used to be able to hit the fastball, and now I can barely hit that off-speed curveball. And so my theory about Perry has always been he didn't want to go out there and present himself in that way. He wanted to be able to still be the Steve Perry he was during the 70s and 80s. But now we're well into the 90s. So you're into your third decade of this. And imagine the kind of toll that this all took on Steve's voice. And then he didn't sing for a while. And from what I've heard, Roger Daltrey is a guy who has publicly stated that if you don't sing, you're eventually going to lose it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And so I think there may have been some truth to that with Steve Perry. I don't know. It could be aging. It could be the fact that during these tours, it just took a lot out of him. And most people say this catalog destroys vocals. Ask Steve Augeri about that. he'll agree. So he's described here as being a few steps slower. But Cain says, I thought, well, he'll come back. He'll come around, meaning that maybe he's just rusty and his voice will get better. He had kind of quit for a long time, not doing anything. A couple of years went by, but yet he sang some great things on that record. They were just great songs. When You Love a Woman got nominated for an American Music Award. I think we got nominated for a Grammy or something like that. Yes, the band did get nominated for a Grammy. They did not win. But certainly that was validation that this band wasn't just, a flash in the pan. By the way, at the time, they had Ross Valerie back and Steve Smith back. And that was Neil Schon who said, yeah, we have to have the Escape lineup back. And so I don't know if Perry was upset about that or not. I think he understood to have those guys back, I think was a good idea at the time. But he goes on here to say, yet he wasn't willing to perform anymore. That's when he just shut it down. Perry, just shut it down. So he kind of did it twice, once in 87 and he did it in 96. We're like, well, now we got another platinum record and you're telling us you don't want to go out again. Now for you, Steve Perry loyalists, I understand you love Steve, but imagine being in the shoes of Neil and John. Here we are, we've got this great album out there and we're supposed to go out on tour and people want to see Steve Perry. And Perry says, nope, not going to do it. So Neil and I are left scratching our heads again, and time went by, and we finally figured it out. This is kind of weird here. He says, he came to my door one time and said, I want to get my band back. And he's talking about Neil Schon here. And I said, well, we need a singer. It's so sad, but at that point, they needed a singer because Perry was not coming back. So we called him and asked him, come back, let's record something. So they're still trying to get Perry to come back. We know you're kind of physically not all 100%, but we can still write and record and put something out in the meantime. He wasn't having any of it. At this point, again, this is a theory I have, Perry had already made up his mind. And there's no mention here of completing the Sony/CBS contract. And I think the band was supposed to put out 2 albums with CBS. And this was the first of 2 albums. And this fulfilled that agreement. And Perry thought, okay, I did my part. there were record executives, and you can trace this, that helped reunite everybody. There was one guy in particular that worked for Sony Music who said, yeah, we're going to have Journey do another album. And I think that will be it. But then I think after the album came out, I think they agreed to do another album with Journey, and Perry took off. So that made things even more difficult for Journey. And, you know, they were supposed to go out on tour, and the tour, I'm sure, would have generated a ton of revenue at the time. But again, Steve Perry, physically not 100%. Cain doesn't go into the specifics about the hip injury. It's basically like a bone disease that Perry had. It was a degenerative bone issue, and he was supposed to get hip surgery. You know, at least according to the VH1 documentary Behind the Music, he was supposed to get it, and he didn't get it, and they wanted him to get it. That was the documentary. He doesn't really talk about that here, but he just says he wasn't having any of it. That's when we decided to move on. Then the big question was, could we, Neil and I, create Journey without him? And it turned out we did all right. Now, I agree with this. A lot of Steve Perry diehards disagree with this. Going on without Steve Perry, a lot of fans really wished Journey would have just been done, right? But as I speak, they're over in Europe touring, and they're probably selling out very large arenas with Arnel Pineda as their lead singer. Cain says, we did pretty darn good. I got to say, when Arrival came out, now this is interesting, I was quite happy with it. It sounded like Journey to me, yet it didn't get the support it needed. Now, that's the last record on the CBS/Sony contract. And from what I understand, they could have extended that contract, but the album didn't do all that well. Keep in mind, it's 2001. Where do you get Journey on the radio? Adult contemporary stations, All the Way was a song that was out there. That was Steve Augeri. That was kind of like a power ballad. And it's a great song if you go listen to it. Nobody's heard that song in like 20-something years. It was on AC radio for, you know, maybe 2 or 3 months. Delilah probably gave it a spin on her syndicated show at night. That's about all the airplay it got, though. Cain says, I'd like to remix that record someday. Now, that's interesting because Perry has been going in and doing the Perry-fronted CBS albums, and this one is an Augeri-fronted album. So it'd be interesting to have Steve Augeri and Jonathan Cain go and do that project. I think people would be very interested to hear what they would do with it at this stage. Cain says it just didn't sound like it should. Maybe they'll give me a budget for that. So maybe he's planning on doing that. Now, I'm going to finish off with the talk about Freedom here, because Freedom, I think, is a good album, but Freedom also suffers from production issues as far as I'm concerned. Cain says, I was disappointed with the way the record company handled it and promoted it. I don't think they got it to where it was supposed to be. We had some pretty cool songs on it. I think it was a very cohesive album for a cut and paste record made during COVID. Could have been different if we had all been in the studio together, but for what it was a pretty cool record. I have to say it was too long. I agree with him. I don't think we needed all those songs, but it had moments. I had fun creating with Neil and Randy and all that stuff, but we're in a lawsuit with Smith and Ross, and there's turmoil in the background. So that was kind of a weird time. But an album is a snapshot of where you are in time, and that's kind of where we were during that time. It is what it is. Again, not a bad record. I would agree with that. But there are some production issues that go beyond just the length of the album. The sound of that album, for some reason, is very mono to me. It doesn't have a rich, full-bodied stereo feel to it. And I'm not sure why that is. the mixing of the album, the mastering of the album. That's an album. What they should do is kind of a less freedom album, right? Put all the great songs together and throw out some of those filler tunes that they put in there. Maybe keep one of them, but not all of them, and remaster it. Do some production on it, and I think people would be interested in a new version of that, and maybe drop it on a different record label. You know, I don't know. It's one of those things. I guess when you have a record label, you can't just undo that. So you give it to them, and then it's up to them to promote it and sell it for you. But I think the big bombshell in this, this whole interview with Cain, is the stuff about Oh Sherry. Oh Sherry was not nice, apparently. So that's very interesting. You know, and Steve Perry agonized over that relationship. I mean, to have a song out there that's on the radio all the time about her to this day, song gets tons of airplay, gets as much airplay as any Journey song, really. And apparently she was not a nice person. So there you have it. Anyway, before I go, and I might dissect more of this interview at some point, I'll put a link in the description of the video where you can read the entire interview. It's WOUB, a radio station, which is an NPR public radio thing. Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time on the lower end of the band near the public radio stations, just because I might tune into one of them by accident and have to cleanse the palate or something later. Here's Voyage, Inception, really great album. If you like vintage Journey and vintage Steve Perry and just fantastic production, I mean, the boys should go and listen to this and hear the warmth in this album compared to kind of like the sterile sounding nature of Freedom. That's kind of how I read that. But, you know, music is very subjective. And I have people always saying to me, how come you don't like this, that, and the other? And I go, I don't know. Just something I don't like. Some stuff I like and some stuff I don't like, you know, and it's just the way things are. Anyway, folks, thanks for supporting the channel. Please pray for peace in the Middle East and around the world and in your own heart. Remember, Jesus is the way to that peace. You can find peace through Jesus Christ. And I truly believe that in my heart. So thanks for watching. See you soon.